I double-checked the dive manifest as the morning sun warmed my shoulders. 20 years of ocean research had taught me to verify everything twice, no matter how routine the mission seemed. The clipboard in my hands held the details for our expedition into the Monterey Canyon. Coordinates, depth, targets, sample requirements, all standard procedure for a research dive. "Everything looking good, Dave?" Sarah asked, approaching with her tablet in hand. "Standard dive profile," I said, glancing up at the clear blue sky stretching across the horizon. "Weather's cooperating for once." The research vessel Custo's Dream rocked gently beneath my feet, its white deck gleaming in the sunlight. We'd left port before dawn, and now we floated above one of the most fascinating underwater formations on the West Coast. The Monterey Canyon wasn't just any ocean trench. It plunged deeper than the Grand Canyon, creating a highway for cold, nutrient-rich water to surge up from the depths. Sarah tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she reviewed her collection protocols. At mid-30s, she was the youngest team member, but already had an impressive publication record on deep-sea invertebrates. Her enthusiasm for marine discovery never seemed to fade, even on routine sample collection trips like this one. "I've refined the sampling grid," she said, showing me her tablet screen. "If we can get core samples from these 5 locations, we'll have comprehensive coverage of the sediment variation." I nodded, appreciating her meticulousness. "Looks good. How's our equipment specialist doing with the checks?" We both turned toward the submersible. The Deep Explorer sat secured in its launch cradle, a gleaming cylinder of technology designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep ocean. Its titanium hull reflected the morning light, and its external manipulator arm, a massive mechanical appendage capable of collecting precise samples, was currently retracted against its side. James crouched near an open access panel, his dark beard and focused expression visible as he ran diagnostics on the submersible systems. He waved without looking up, completely absorbed in his work. "Final checks are green across the board," he called out. "Oxygen recycling at optimal levels, battery charge at 100%. And the manipulator arm is responding perfectly to all test commands." I walked over, feeling the familiar pre-dive mixture of anticipation and focus settling into my muscles. James stood and wiped his hands on a rag, his lean frame straightening as he closed the access panel. "Any concerns?" I asked. He shook his head. "She's running better than last expedition. I upgraded the hydraulic systems on the manipulator arm. Should give us more precision when collecting those sediment cores Sarah wants." The 3 of us stood looking at the Deep Explorer, our home for the next 8 hours. The submersible wasn't spacious, barely room for 3 adults and our equipment. But its cramped interior represented the cutting edge of deep-sea exploration technology, reinforced viewports, life support systems, and communications equipment that would keep us connected to the surface throughout our descent to 8,000 meters. I conducted hundreds of similar dives throughout my career. From the Mid-Atlantic Ridge to the Mariana Trench, this mission was straightforward by comparison. Collect sediment samples from the abyssal zone, document any unique biological specimens, and return to the surface. Yet something felt different this time. A subtle unease I couldn't quite place. "You okay?" Sarah asked, noticing my expression. "Fine," I said, dismissing the feeling. "Just pre-dive mental checklist." The deck crew began preparing for our launch, moving with practiced efficiency around the cradle that held the Deep Explorer. I returned to my quarters to grab my dive log, a paper backup I still maintained despite the digital recordings, and caught my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The face looking back at me showed the weathered creases around my eyes from years of squinting at ocean horizons. Salt and pepper hair kept short for practicality. My broad shoulders and strong hands had been shaped by decades of handling heavy underwater equipment. When I returned to the deck, James and Sarah were already suited up and waiting. We performed our final equipment checks, testing our communication devices, and reviewing the emergency protocols one last time. Surface team will maintain radio contact throughout the dive. The expedition director reminded us from his position near the control station. Standard check-ins every 30 minutes. Estimated dive time is 8 hours. 3 down, 2 on the seafloor, 3 back up. I nodded, mentally tracing our planned descent route. The Monterey Canyon would take us to approximately 8,000 meters below sea level. Not the deepest dive I'd piloted, but still well into the abyssal zone where pressure crushed most conventional equipment. "Let's get moving," I said, leading the way to the submersible. We entered the cramped chamber. One by one, I took the pilot's position, settling into the familiar contours of the control seat. Sarah positioned herself at the research station with its array of sampling equipment controls and monitoring devices. James took the engineering station where he could monitor all the Deep Explorer systems throughout our journey. The hatch sealed with a solid thunk, followed by the hiss of the atmosphere regulation system kicking in. Outside, the deck crew secured the external locks and signaled readiness to the crane operator. Comms check came the voice of our surface coordinator through our headsets. "Pilot responding, comms clear," I said. "Research station comms clear," Sarah confirmed. "Engineering all systems nominal." "Comms clear," James finished. I ran through the pre-dive checklist, bringing the Deep Explorer systems online one by one. The interior lights adjusted to their operational brightness, and the control screens illuminated with data streams, depth, pressure, oxygen levels, power consumption, and dozens of other vital parameters. "Deep Explorer ready for deployment," I reported to the surface team. "Acknowledged. Beginning crane operation now," came the response. We felt the first gentle swing as the crane lifted our submersible from its cradle. Through the viewport, I watched the deck of the Custo's Dream fall away. For a moment, we hung suspended over the dark blue Pacific waters. A tiny bubble of technology and human determination about to plunge into one of Earth's least explored environments. "Everyone ready?" I asked, my hands moving automatically across the control panel. "Ready," Sarah said, her voice carrying the focused excitement she always brought to new dives. "All systems go," James confirmed, his attention already on the engineering displays. The crane began lowering us toward the water's surface. I dismissed that lingering sense of unease again, focusing instead on the dive profile displayed on my screen. This was routine. This was what we did. I'd piloted submersibles through far more challenging conditions than a calm water descent in a well-mapped canyon. The Deep Explorer touched the water, and small waves lapped against our viewport. Gradually, the blue surrounded us as we submerged, the sunlight beginning its transformation from bright directional beams to the diffused blue glow of shallow ocean water. I initiated the descent sequence, and we detached from the crane's cable, becoming independent from our surface vessel. "Descent commenced," I reported. "Current depth 20 meters, descent rate nominal at 15 meters per minute." Around us, the ocean changed from bright turquoise to deeper blue as we sank into the Pacific. Schools of fish scattered at our approach, their silver sides flashing in our external lights. I settled into the rhythm of the dive, monitoring our systems and trajectory as the familiar sensation of sinking into the ocean's depths began our journey into the unknown. The blue of the shallow ocean faded to a deeper indigo as we continued our descent. Our external lights cut through the darkening water, creating a small bubble of visibility around the deep explorer. The sunlight that had filtered through the surface now appeared as just a dim glow far above us, a reminder of the world we were leaving behind. Passing 1,000 meters, I announced, watching the depth gauge on my control panel. Hull integrity perfect, descent rate stable at 15 meters per minute. Sarah had her face close to the starboard viewport, camera ready to document anything that drifted into our light. James sat at the engineering station, his fingers dancing across the system monitors, checking and rechecking our life support and power systems. Surface control. This is Deep Explorer. I said into my headset mic, we've crossed the 1,000-meter mark. All systems nominal. The radio crackled slightly before the response came through. Copy that, Deep Explorer. Weather conditions remain favorable up here. Continue your descent as planned. The radio communications had a slight delay now, the distance already creating a perceptible gap between our worlds. I made minor adjustments to our descent vector, keeping us on the planned trajectory down the Monterey Canyon Central Channel. Look at this, Sarah called, pointing to something outside the viewport. A cluster of siphonophores drifted past, their transparent bodies connected in chains that pulsed with subtle bioluminescence. Colony organisms that function as a single entity. Some can grow to over 100 feet long. Like us in this tin can, James quipped, not looking up from his monitors. 3 separate humans functioning as one research unit. Sarah smiled as she photographed the creatures. Except siphonophores evolved to work perfectly together over millions of years. We still bicker about the thermostat setting. Speaking of which, James said, I've adjusted the internal temperature down 2 degrees to compensate for the increased efficiency of our cooling systems at depth. You might want to put on your sweaters soon. I felt the familiar sense of routine settling over me as we continued downward. 2 hours into our descent, the darkness outside became absolute. Our powerful external lights created the only illumination, cutting through black water that had never seen sunlight. The marine snow, tiny particles of organic matter drifting down from the surface, became more visible against the dark backdrop, like stars in a night sky. Surface control. Deep Explorer checking in at 2-hour mark, I reported. Current depth 2,800 meters and descending steadily. All systems functioning within parameters. Copy Deep Explorer. Continue regular reporting schedule. Sarah moved between viewports, documenting everything that appeared in our lights. Occasional deep-sea fish darted away from our intrusion, bizarre creatures with enormous jaws, distended stomachs, and bodies adapted to the crushing pressure. I never get tired of seeing them, she said, watching a gulper eel twist away from our lights, its massive jaw folded against its body. Each one is a miracle of adaptation. James finally looked up from his systems check. I'm going to test the manipulator arm while we still have plenty of buffer room. Dave, can you bring us to a full stop for about 5 minutes? I nodded and gradually slowed our descent until we hung suspended at just over 3,000 meters. The pressure outside would crush an unprotected human instantly, but inside our reinforced hull, we remained safe in our artificial environment. James activated the arm controls, and we heard the hydraulic systems engage as the mechanical limb extended from its housing on the submersible's exterior. Through the viewport, I watched the arm unfold into the darkness, its joints moving with precise control. New hydraulic system is responding perfectly, James said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of an engineer seeing his improvements function as designed. Grip strength calibrated. Fine motor control optimal. We'll have no trouble collecting your sediment cores, Sarah. That thing costs more than my house, I commented, watching the mechanical arm bend and flex through its full range of motion. James laughed. Your house, my house, and probably Sarah's house combined. The titanium alloy joints alone cost more than a luxury car. And worth every penny if it gets me those deep layer samples, Sarah replied, not looking up from her preparation of the collection containers. Those sediments might contain microfossils from millions of years ago. I checked my watch as James retracted the arm back into its housing. 3 hours in, we should be approaching the 4,000-meter mark. The depth gauge confirmed my estimate, 3,980 meters and increasing. I re-established our descent rate and picked up the radio. Surface control, Deep Explorer at 3-hour mark. We've just passed 4,000 meters. All systems remain nominal. Life support at 92% capacity. Hull integrity perfect. Acknowledged, Deep Explorer. Your projected arrival at target depth remains on schedule. Sarah had returned to the viewport, her face illuminated by the glow of bioluminescent creatures that pulsed and flickered in the darkness. Passing through the twilight zone into the midnight zone, she said with genuine wonder in her voice. Less than 1% of all sunlight penetrates beyond 1,000 meters. Nothing down here has evolved with any relationship to the sun. They create their own light, their own rules. I understood her fascination. Despite hundreds of dives, I still felt a profound sense of privilege witnessing environments so few humans would ever see. The deep ocean remained Earth's most inaccessible frontier. More people had walked on the moon than had visited the deepest parts of our oceans. Battery levels at 87%, James reported. Oxygen recycling systems running at peak efficiency. We could stay down here for 20 hours if needed. Let's stick to the plan, I said. I'd rather keep our safety margins intact. The submersible continued its steady journey downward. The pressure reading climbed with each passing minute, and the hull responded with occasional creaks and soft groans, normal sounds that I'd grown accustomed to over decades of deep dives. To a novice, they might sound alarming, but I found them reassuring, evidence that our vessel was flexing exactly as designed to handle the increasing external pressure. What do you hope to find in those sediment samples? I asked Sarah as we passed 4,500 meters. She looked up from her preparation work, her eyes bright with scientific curiosity. The Monterey Canyon has unique layering patterns because of its proximity to both the continental shelf and the deep abyssal plain. Each layer tells a story of different oceanic periods, changes in temperature, acidity, and animal populations. With cores from 8,000 meters, I might find evidence of previously undocumented extinction events or climate shifts. For some weird new microbes, I'll need to repair the submersible from, James added with a grin. That only happened once, Sarah protested. And that acidic biofilm wasn't my fault. Tell that to the $300,000 of equipment it dissolved, James retorted. Their good-natured banter filled the cramped cabin as we continued deeper. At 5,000 meters, we passed from the midnight zone into the abyssal zone. The water temperature outside had dropped to just above freezing, and the pressure exceeded 500 atmospheres. Surface control. Deep Explorer checking in at 5,000 meters, I reported. All systems remain stable. External temperature at 2 degrees Celsius. We're encountering increased bioluminescent activity at this depth. Copy that, Deep Explorer. You're making excellent progress. James moved to stand behind me, checking our trajectory on the navigation system. Right on target. The canyon wall should be visible to our port side in about 20 minutes. I nodded, making a small adjustment to our heading. The Monterey Canyon's topography was well mapped, but its sheer walls and deep channels required precise navigation. One wrong turn could send us into a dead-end trench or put us too close to unstable sediment deposits. Did I ever tell you about my first deep dive? I asked, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled over the cabin. Sarah looked up from her notes. In the Mariana Trench? No, that came later. My first deep dive was off the coast of Chile researching hydrothermal vents. I was just a graduate student assistant. We were in an older submersible, nothing like this one. I gestured around at our advanced equipment. The viewport was barely larger than a dinner plate, and we had maybe 6 hours of air. James looked interested. What depth? Only about 3,000 meters, but it felt like the edge of the universe to me back then. We were tracking a black smoker vent when our navigation system failed. Spent 2 hours trying to find our way back to the mapped area, oxygen levels dropping the entire time. What happened? Sarah asked. The pilot, a guy named Harkins, had memorized the seafloor topography as backup. Got us home with just 30 minutes of air to spare. Taught me 2 lessons. Always have multiple navigation references and never go deep without redundant systems. The conversation paused as a massive shadow passed through our lights. A 6-gill shark, nearly 20 feet long, swam lazily across our path, completely undisturbed by our presence. Magnificent, Sarah whispered, raising her camera. They've remained almost unchanged for millions of years. The ancient predator disappeared back into the darkness, leaving us alone again in our small bubble of light. Surface control. Deep Explorer at 5-hour mark. Current depth 5,800 meters. We're approaching the 6,000 meter threshold. Acknowledge, Deep Explorer, your signal strength remains good. Meteorological conditions on the surface remain stable. Our descent continued in focused silence. The external pressure now exceeded 600 atmospheres, but inside our reinforced shell, we remained comfortably insulated from the crushing force that would instantly implode any unprotected object. As we passed the 6,000-meter mark, James conducted another full systems check, confirming that all equipment continued to function normally under the extreme conditions. Sarah organized her collection containers one final time, labeling each with location markers and depth indicators. The water outside had turned completely black, with only our external lights providing any illumination. The occasional marine snow drifted past our windows, the constant rain of organic matter from the surface that fed the deep ecosystem. Sometimes a bizarre fish or translucent invertebrate would dart through our light beam before vanishing back into the darkness. I felt the familiar calm that always came at this stage of a deep dive. There was something profoundly peaceful about being completely isolated from the surface world, floating in an environment so alien and unexplored. Down here, the constant chatter of human civilization disappeared. No phones, no internet, no crowds. Just 3 humans in a small bubble of technology, suspended in Earth's last frontier. 2 more hours to target depth, I said, checking our descent rate. Right on schedule, 8,000 meters, I announced, watching the depth gauge with the satisfaction that comes from reaching a milestone. 200 more to go before we hit our target depth. James nodded at his engineering station, his eyes never leaving the bank of monitors. Hull integrity remains perfect. External pressure reading at 812 atmospheres. Target depth reached, I said, easing back on the controls. 8,200 meters. I adjusted our buoyancy until we hovered just above the seafloor. Below us stretched a landscape few human eyes had ever witnessed. A vast plain of silt and sediment that extended beyond the reach of our lights in all directions. Fine particles drifted through our beams, disturbed by our presence and the gentle currents that move through even these extreme depths. Surface control. Deep Explorer has reached target depth at 8,200 meters, I reported, beginning seafloor exploration phase. The radio crackled before the response came through, delayed by our extreme depth. Copy that, Deep Explorer. All readings from your telemetry look good. You're cleared to begin sample collection. Sarah pressed her face against the viewport, camera already in hand. It's beautiful, she whispered, snapping rapid photographs of the barren landscape. Like another planet. She wasn't wrong. The abyssal plain stretched out before us like an alien desert, devoid of features, except for the occasional rise or depression in the seafloor. The sediment was a pale beige under our lights, undisturbed by human presence until our arrival. Here and there, strange life forms broke the monotony, ghostly white sea cucumbers that crawled with agonizing slowness across the bottom, and clusters of tube worms that swayed gently in currents we couldn't feel. I'm going to set us down at the primary collection point, I said, easing the submersible lower until we hovered just 2 meters above the seafloor. The landing felt like barely a bump as I brought us to rest on the soft sediment. Clouds of silt billowed around our external lights, briefly reducing visibility before settling back to the bottom. Manipulator arm systems online, James reported, sliding his chair closer to the auxiliary control panel. Hydraulic pressure optimal. Sample containers prepped and ready. Sarah moved from the viewport to her research station, pulling up the collection grid on her monitor. First target is 2 meters forward of our current position. We need a core sample at least 30 centimeters deep. I nodded and activated the external arm controls. The mechanical appendage extended smoothly from its housing on the side of our submersible, unfolding into the water with precision. Through the viewport, I watched as the titanium arm stretched toward the seafloor, its drill attachment poised above the undisturbed sediment. Beginning collection, I said, guiding the arm downward. The drill bit penetrated the soft bottom with minimal resistance, sinking easily into millions of years of accumulated marine snow and microscopic remains. The collection tube filled with layered sediment, each stratum representing tens of thousands of years of Earth's history. Perfect penetration, Sarah said, watching the sample fill the transparent collection tube. Look at those distinct color bands. The darker layer about halfway down might correspond to the last major extinction event. When the tube was full, I retracted the drill and swung the arm toward the sample storage bay. The mechanical precision of the arm never stopped amazing me. Here, under crushing pressure that would instantly kill a human, we could manipulate objects with the delicacy of a surgeon. First sample secured, James confirmed as the collection tube locked into its storage rack. 29 more to go. We fell into a comfortable rhythm over the next 40 minutes. Sarah would identify the next collection point. I would position the submersible and operate the manipulator arm, and James would monitor our systems while preparing each new sample container. This is going exactly as planned, Sarah said, marking off another successful collection on her tablet. We've already got 12 perfect core samples from across the primary grid. Surface control, Deep Explorer checking in, I said to my headset. We've completed 40% of our planned sample collection. All systems remain nominal. Life support at 78% capacity, battery levels at 65%. Acknowledged, Deep Explorer, came to reply. You're making excellent progress. Weather up here remains stable. No concerns for your return journey. I stretched in my seat, relieving muscles that had grown stiff from the hours of focused work. Our cramped cabin had become comfortably familiar during the long descent, and now the routine of sample collection had created a sense of scientific satisfaction. "How's our time looking?" I asked James. He checked the mission clock. "We've been on the seafloor for 43 minutes. With our current collection rate, we should complete the planned samples within another hour and a half, leaving us plenty of margin before our ascent window." "Perfect," I said, returning my attention to the manipulator controls. "Let's move to the secondary collection grid." I activated the submersible thrusters, lifting us gently off the seafloor. Another cloud of silt billowed beneath us as we rose, temporarily obscuring the bottom. I guided us forward, watching the navigation display that showed our position relative to Sarah's collection grid. "Just 20 meters east," she instructed, her eyes fixed on her monitor. "There's a slight depression in the seafloor there that might contain more varied sediment layers." The submersible moved smoothly through the dark water, our lights illuminating new sections of the abyssal plain. As we traveled, a cluster of transparent anemones came into view, their tentacles waving gently as we passed overhead. I never get tired of this," I commented, my gaze fixed on the strange creatures shrinking in the distance behind us. "It's amazing how life persists, even down here. Most of these species haven't changed for millions of years," Sarah responded, snapping pictures of the anemones. "They've nailed their adaptations to this extreme environment. No need for any further evolution." We arrived at the next collection site, and I gently maneuvered the submersible back toward the ocean floor. Our lights illuminated more of the same scene, an endless expanse of silt stretching as far as we could see, with only occasional signs of life scattered across the barren landscape. "Touchdown," I announced as we settled onto the bottom once again. "Second collection grid initiated." Sarah leaned forward in her seat, her eyes scanning the new terrain through the viewport. "The sediment looks different here, finer, almost powdery. I'm hoping we'll find evidence of underwater avalanches from the canyon walls in these layers." I extended the manipulator arm, positioning it precisely over the spot Sarah had indicated. As the drill bit descended toward the seafloor, I felt completely in my element. This was our purpose. Methodical, careful scientific work in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Despite the inherent dangers of deep-sea exploration, moments like these felt almost serene. Initiating core sample, I announced, activating the drill. The bit penetrated the seafloor as easily as before, sinking into sediment that had remained undisturbed for millennia until our arrival. As the collection tube filled, I noticed subtle variations in the layering pattern. This sample displayed more distinct banding than the previous ones. "Look at that stratification," Sarah exclaimed excitedly. "Much more dramatic color changes between layers. Something significant happened here, geologically speaking." James leaned over to examine the sample as I brought it back to the storage bay. "Volcanic activity. Maybe that black band could be ash deposits." "That's my guess too," Sarah agreed. Monterey Canyon sits near several underwater volcanic systems. This could be evidence of a major eruption that affected deep-sea life throughout this region. We continued our collection process, moving methodically through the secondary grid. Each sample was carefully labeled with precise GPS coordinates and depth measurements, accompanied by Sarah's detailed photographs and notes. The routine felt comfortable and familiar, exactly like dozens of research dives I'd piloted throughout my career. The extreme depth added an element of wonder, but the scientific process remained the same, regardless of whether we were at 1,000 or 8,000 meters. Battery levels at 62%, James reported after our 15th sample. Oxygen recycling is still at peak efficiency. We've got plenty of resources for the remaining collection points in our ascent. I nodded, already focusing on the next target location. Surface control, Deep Explorer continuing sample collection is planned. We've completed half of our projected samples with no issues to report. The brief delay before the response reminded me of our isolation. Copy that, Deep Explorer. Your telemetry shows all systems functioning normally. Continue as planned. I guided the submersible toward the next collection point, carefully watching our navigation display. The water around us remained perfectly clear, with visibility extending about 30 meters in each direction under our powerful lights. Beyond that radius lay absolute darkness, an unknown void that had remained largely unexplored by humans. Next location is just ahead, Sarah said, checking her grid coordinates. This should give us a good comparison sample from the edge of that small ridge formation. As I maneuvered into position, I felt satisfied with our progress. We were working efficiently, collecting valuable scientific data that would keep Sarah busy in the lab for months. The manipulator arm responded perfectly to my inputs, a testament to James' recent upgrades to the hydraulic systems. I began planning our movement to the next site after this one, mentally mapping the most efficient route through the remaining collection points. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected, a textbook deep-sea research mission with no complications or surprises. Little did I know that our peaceful scientific work was about to be violently interrupted, transforming our routine expedition into something none of us could have imagined. I was just positioning the manipulator arm for our next core sample when the proximity sensors erupted with a shrill alarm. The sound cut through the submersible's quiet hum, making all three of us jump. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with surprise. I scanned the instrument panel, trying to make sense of the readings. The proximity alert indicated something massive approaching from beyond our visibility range. "James, are you seeing this?" I tapped the sonar display, where a large object was moving toward us at an impossible speed. James leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "That can't be right. The size reading must be malfunctioning." "Run a diagnostic," I said, already adjusting our external lights to point in the direction of the approaching object. No time, James replied, his voice tense. "Whatever it is, it's coming straight for us." The sonar ping accelerated, the intervals between signals compressing as the object closed the distance. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. Nothing should be moving that fast at this depth. The extreme pressure made rapid movement physically impossible for any known species. "I'm bringing the manipulator arm back in," I said, already initiating the retraction sequence. Before the arm could fully retract, something massive slammed into the side of our submersible. The impact threw us sideways, sending tools and equipment tumbling across the cabin. "What was that?" Sarah gasped, bracing herself against her station. I didn't have time to answer. Through the porthole, I caught a glimpse of something pale moving through the water just beyond our lights. Then it was gone. "I'm initiating emergency ascent," I said, my hands flying across the controls. Another impact hit us, harder this time. The submersible rocked violently. Then something blocked our forward viewport entirely, something with a texture like wet leather, patterned with suckers larger than dinner plates. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. A tentacle, but impossibly large. The massive appendage slid across our viewport, revealing more of itself, thicker than a telephone pole, muscular and powerful. Then another tentacle joined it, wrapping around the hull of our vessel. I felt the submersible shift as something grabbed us. "James, full power to the thrusters." I shouted, fighting with the controls. "Already there," he called back, his voice tight with fear. "We're at maximum output." The tentacles tightened around our hull. Metal groaned under the pressure. Then, with a sickening lurch, our submersible began moving, not upward toward safety, but sideways through the water, pulled by whatever had grabbed us. "The hull integrity is holding," James reported, his eyes fixed on his monitors. "But if those tentacles compress any harder—" His words cut off as something new appeared in our viewport. An enormous eye, larger than our entire submersible, pressed against the glass. The pupil contracted as our lights hit it, adjusting to the brightness. The eye was dark, almost black, with hints of deep blue and green around the edges. Sarah let out a sound I'd never heard from her before, part gasp, part scream. "It's a squid," she said. "But that's impossible. No squid grows this large." The eye studied us, moving slightly as the creature adjusted its position. I could see intelligence in that gaze. Not just animal curiosity, but something calculating, something aware. "It has to be at least 50 meters long," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe more." The squid's tentacles tightened again, and warning lights flashed across my control panel. The pressure sensors were showing dangerous compression on the outer hull. "We need to get free," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, kill the external lights." "What? Why?" she asked. "Just do it." Sarah reached over and switched off our powerful exterior lights. The viewport went completely black except for the faint glow from our instrument panels. For a moment, nothing happened. Then gradually, points of bioluminescent light appeared outside, glowing spots along the squid's tentacles and body, pulsing softly in patterns I couldn't comprehend. "It's communicating," Sarah whispered. "Or at least signaling something." The eye was still there. I could tell by the absence of lights in that part of the viewport. It was watching us in the darkness. The submersible lurched again as the squid pulled us further. On the depth gauge, I saw we were being dragged horizontally across the seafloor. "Where is it taking us?" James asked. I didn't answer. My mind was racing through our limited options. The manipulator arm was still partially extended, our only external tool with any strength. "I'm going to try something," I said, reaching for the arm controls. "Be ready." I turned our internal lights to maximum brightness, momentarily illuminating the cabin with blinding intensity. Then I slammed my hand down on the external light controls, igniting all our exterior floodlights simultaneously. The sudden burst of light caused the massive eye to contract painfully. The squid's tentacles flexed in what might have been surprise. In that moment of distraction, I drove the manipulator arm forward with all its hydraulic force, aiming directly for the center of the eye. The reinforced titanium arm struck home. I felt the impact reverberate through the control stick. The eye disappeared from our viewport as the squid recoiled. The tentacles around our hull suddenly loosened. "We're free," I shouted, immediately engaging our thrusters. Hold on. But our momentary victory came at a terrible cost. The wounded squid thrashed violently, its enormous tentacles whipping through the water with incredible force. One massive limb struck our submersible broadside, sending us spinning through the water. Warning alarms blared throughout the cabin. Sarah was thrown from her seat, colliding with James at the engineering station. I clung to the controls, trying desperately to stabilize our vessel as we tumbled through the darkness. "The manipulator arm is gone," James called out, pulling himself back to his station. "Torn clean off." I barely registered his words. On the navigation display, I saw something that turned my blood cold. We were dropping rapidly, and not just because of the impact. The seafloor beneath us had simply disappeared. "We're over a trench," I said, fighting the controls. "A deep one." The depth gauge began climbing rapidly. 8,300 meters. "That's not possible," Sarah said, crawling back to her station. "There's no trench this deep in the Monterey Canyon system." She was right. Our map showed nothing like this, no underwater canyon that plunged deeper than our target depth. Yet the evidence was undeniable as our depth reading continued its terrifying climb. 9,000 meters, James read off, his voice hollow with disbelief. "This shouldn't exist." I worked the thrusters, trying to slow our descent, but the damage from the squid's attack had compromised several systems. We were falling too fast, tumbling as we went, dropping into depths no human had ever seen. "Warning, exceeding rated crush depth," the automated system announced in its emotionless voice. Hull integrity compromised. The lights flickered as power fluctuated. Through the viewport, I caught occasional glimpses of the rocky walls of the trench flashing past in our external lights. We were falling into a massive underwater canyon that didn't exist on any of our charts. 10,000 meters, James announced, his voice shaking slightly. "We are now deeper than Challenger deep." The submersible creaked and groaned as the external pressure mounted, noises I'd never heard before. Metal straining beyond its design limits. Seals compressing under impossible pressure. "Can you stop our descent?" Sarah asked, gripping her station to keep from being thrown around. I shook my head. "The vertical thrusters are offline. We're in free fall." The depth gauge continued its relentless climb. 10,500 meters. "The hull won't hold much longer," James warned, his eyes fixed on the structural integrity readings. "We're nearly 40% beyond maximum rated depth." A hairline crack appeared in the corner of the forward viewport, small but unmistakable. A drop of water squeezed through, catching the light as it formed a perfect sphere in our cabin. I watched the depth gauge in horrified fascination as we continued to plummet into the impossible trench. 12,000 meters. The deepest recorded point in all Earth's oceans was Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench at 10,935 meters. We had just passed that by over 1,000 meters, and we were still falling. The pressure alarms screamed in harmony with the depth warnings and the hull integrity alerts. The cacophony of emergency signals filled the cabin as we tumbled deeper into darkness, far beyond the limits of our submersible's design, far beyond what should have been possible. And somewhere above us, the wounded squid remained, a creature that couldn't exist, yet undeniably did. A monster from the deep that had sent us plummeting toward what felt increasingly like a watery grave. The depth gauge continued its impossible climb. 12,200 meters. Each number represented a new record in human descent. Though none of us would live to report it, the hairline crack in the viewport grew longer, branching like a river on a map. More droplets squeezed through, forming perfect spheres that floated through our cabin. I kept fighting the controls, but it was like trying to steer a brick. Our thrusters sputtered intermittently, giving us brief moments of control before cutting out again. Nothing reliable. We're still in freefall. Hull integrity at 28%, James called out, his voice steady despite everything. We're way beyond catastrophic failure territory. Sarah pulled herself back to her station, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead where she'd struck a monitor during our tumble. The trench walls are widening. We're entering some kind of chamber. I looked through the viewport between the spreading cracks. Our external lights revealed glimpses of a vast open space replacing the narrow walls of the trench. The seafloor had disappeared from our sonar completely. 13,000 meters, I said, hearing the disbelief in my own voice. This is impossible. The submersible shuddered violently. Metal screamed as the pressure warped our hull. The sound reminded me of being inside a soda can while someone crushed it. Can you get any thrust at all? Sarah asked, typing frantically at her console. I'm trying to log everything. Someone needs to know what we found down here. I tried the vertical thrusters again. They fired weakly, slowing our descent marginally before failing completely. Nothing reliable. We're still in freefall. James abandoned his engineering station and moved to the emergency supplies, pulling out survival suits. We need to prepare for a deafening crack cut him off mid-sentence. The rear bulkhead split along a seam, a finger-width gap that shouldn't have been possible in our reinforced hull. For one frozen moment, she reached for me, eyes wide with panic. I stretched out my hand, our fingers almost touching. Then the pressure wave hit her. I saw the exact moment when the laws of physics crush her body. Her expression froze in a grimace of pain that lasted only a split second before her eyes went blank. Blood clouded the water around her. Sarah, I screamed, still reaching for her. Her body floated lifelessly in the rising water, moving with the currents now filling our cabin. James drifted nearby, equally still. I retreated to the pilot compartment, I called out, my voice sounding hollow in the partially flooded cabin. No response. Not that I expected one. In the faint red glow of the emergency lights, I could make out their forms floating in the water. Sarah's long hair swirled around her head like seaweed. James was face down, motionless. The sight burned itself into my mind. I tried the radio again, more out of desperate habit than hope. Mayday, mayday, deep explorer to surface. Hull breach, we've hit bottom at... I squinted at the depth gauge, its display flickering, but still functioning. 13,812 meters. Static answered me. Of course, no radio signal could penetrate almost 14 kilometers of seawater. I took stock of my situation with a detached clarity that sometimes comes with shock. The pilot compartment was sealed as well as it could be with a damaged hatch, but water continued seeping in. The external pressure was slowly equalizing with our internal cabin. When it did, we would be completely flooded. I couldn't feel my legs at all. The water temperature was just above freezing, and hypothermia was already setting in. My hands shook uncontrollably. My thoughts came sluggishly, as if moving through molasses. The viewport miraculously had not completely failed, despite the spiderweb of cracks across its surface. Through it, I could see nothing but darkness. Our external lights must have been destroyed in the impact. I tried to move but found myself partially pinned by a section of collapsed ceiling. Pain shot through my upper body when I pushed against it. Something was broken. Ribs, probably. "This is it, then," I said aloud, my voice echoing in the silent tomb our submersible had become. 14 kilometers of water above me. No way to signal for help. No one even knew where we were. We'd fallen into a trench that didn't exist on any map. The cold was working its way up my body, the numbness reaching my chest. I thought about the massive squid, wondering if it was still up there somewhere. I thought about the impossible depths we discovered. I thought about Sarah and James, who had trusted me to bring them safely back to the surface. The water rose to my shoulders. The submersible creaked and groaned as more seams slowly gave way to the crushing pressure outside. It was only a matter of time in its making. The vibration came again, stronger. The remaining water in our cabin rippled with concentric patterns. The metal around me sang in response, a low harmonic that made my teeth ache. A third pulse, and I felt something warm trickle over my lip. Blood. My nose was bleeding. The pressure built inside my skull as the vibration intensified, no longer individual pulses, but continuous bone-deep humming. I tried to lift my hand to wipe the blood, but my arms responded sluggishly. The freezing water had risen to my lower lip. I tilted my head back, buying myself another minute of air. The submersible's emergency lights flickered as the humming grew louder, more insistent. The water itself seemed to carry the vibration, making it impossible to escape. My ears popped painfully, and more warmth trickled down the sides of my face. Blood from my ears now, too. The pressure inside my head built to an unbearable level. Through the spiderweb cracks of our viewport, I saw movement in the darkness beyond. Our emergency lights barely penetrated the black water, but something was out there. Something big. The massive shape approached slowly, deliberately. Tentacles appeared first, spread wide like enormous fingers reaching for us. Then the main body came into view, dwarfing our broken vessel. The squid. It had followed us down. Its body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, blue-green light flowing across its surface in hypnotic waves. The giant eye that I'd struck with our manipulator arm was now cloudy white, damaged beyond repair. But the other eye, that terrible, intelligent eye, fixed on me. As our submersible pressed onward, an unmistakable sense of purpose permeating its every hum, that humming grew louder, more insistent. A horrifying fascination gripped me as I realized the sound emanated from the colossal squid itself. The creature generated a bone-rattling vibration that shook our vessel with tremendous force, turning my insides to jelly. More blood trickled from my nose, gushed from my ears. My vision swam, blurring at the edges, as the pressure on my head threatened to split my skull into pieces. The squid moved closer, an ominous silhouette against the abyssal darkness. Its tentacles, thick as redwoods, extended toward our fragile submersible. One massive appendage, a grotesque, living cable, dragged across our viewport, leaving a trail of glowing, phosphorescent mucus on the already cracked glass. The humming intensified, a deafening roar in my ears, until I could no longer hear anything else, not even my own frantic heartbeat. I resigned myself to the inevitable, convinced my suffering would end quickly now, either from drowning in the rising water or from whatever unimaginable tortures the squid had planned for us. But then, just when I had accepted my fate, came a new sensation, one that defied all logic and understanding. We were moving, not drifting aimlessly or being pulled inexorably, but rising, ascending from the crushing depths. The entire seafloor beneath our submersible began to shift, to heave and groan like some slumbering giant awakening. At first, I dismissed it as another hallucination a cruel trick played by my oxygen-starved brain. But the movement was too consistent, too deliberate, too powerful to be a mere figment of my imagination. The rocky surface we crashed upon, the seabed that had seemed so solid and unyielding, split apart with a thunderous crack, sending clouds of ancient silt billowing around us, obscuring everything in a swirling vortex of sediment. Our vessel tilted precariously sideways as whatever we had landed on began its inexorable ascent. Through the murky water and swirling sediment, a horrifying truth began to dawn on me, a revelation that shattered the very foundations of my understanding. What I had taken for the seafloor, what all our instruments had registered as solid ground, was in fact moving, living, breathing. We had crashed onto the back of something unimaginably large, something beyond human comprehension. The squid, sensing the shift in power, retreated slightly, its tentacles pulling back in a gesture that seemed almost deferential, as the thing beneath us continued to rise from its eon-long slumber. The humming, that infernal vibration that had tormented us for so long, changed pitch, becoming deeper, more resonant, almost like a conversation between titans, a primordial exchange echoing through the ages. As the sediment slowly cleared, revealing the truth of our situation, I got my first glimpse of what lay beneath us, what supported our shattered vessel and carried us upward toward the light. Scales. Enormous scales, each the size of suburban houses, encrusted with centuries, no millennia, of deep-sea growth. Barnacle colonies larger than cars had formed on its surface, grotesque cities clinging to the hide of a god. Entire ecosystems of tube worms and blind crustaceans covered what I now recognized as a massive, living carapace. Through the viewport, distorted by cracks and encrusted with glowing mucus, I watched in horrified fascination as a section of what I had thought was an underwater mountain range began to move, to flex and undulate with unnatural grace. A serpentine neck, thicker than any redwood, rose from the seafloor, shedding tons of silt and rock that had accumulated over what must have been millions of years of stillness, disturbed only by the slow, relentless pressure of the deep. The creature, for it could only be called a creature despite its impossible size, lifted its head into view, an act that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. The neck alone stretched upward at least 100 m before disappearing into the inky blackness above us, a testament to the sheer scale of this being. The head, when it finally came into view, defied comprehension, shattering the limits of human imagination. It resembled a dragon from ancient mythology, a creature of legend brought to life in the crushing depths of the ocean. A massive, elongated skull with ridges and horns that had been colonized by deep-sea life, grotesque ornaments adorning a god. Eyes, or rather, the sockets for eyes, larger than our entire submersible, still closed but twitching faintly beneath scaled lids, hinting at the consciousness that lay dormant within. A mouth, a gaping maw that could swallow cruise ships whole, lined with teeth that promised only oblivion. The Leviathan, a creature of myth and legend, was awakening from what must have been an eon-long slumber, roused by the squid's strange humming call, a siren song that echoed through the ages. More of its body became visible as it rose from the seafloor, disturbing the ancient sediments and revealing the true scale of its immensity. What we had taken for underwater hills were merely the curves of its enormous form, the contours of a living continent. The trenches, including the one we had fallen into, were simply the spaces between its coiled body, valleys carved into the flesh of a god. The squid continued its humming, that unsettling vibration that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of reality, floating before the dragon-like creature as it slowly awakened, as if offering itself in some primordial ritual. They seemed to recognize each other, these two impossible beings, These titans that existed in depth science had never truly explored, creatures that defied all human understanding. I took what might be my final breath, tilting my head back as far as possible to keep my nose above the rising flood of seawater. My consciousness faded in and out, the lack of oxygen and the extreme cold pushing me inexorably toward oblivion, a welcoming darkness that promised release from the horrors I had witnessed. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me completely was the Leviathan's eye opening, a slow, deliberate act that seemed to herald the end of the world. An ancient eye, bigger than a house, with a vertical pupil that contracted in the dim light of our emergency lamps, a gaze that seemed to pierce the very depths of my soul. An eye that had witnessed the passing of millions of years in the darkest depths of our planet. An eye that had seen civilizations rise and fall, continents shift and erode. An eye that was now looking directly at us, at our fragile vessel, at our insignificant existence. The Leviathan's eye fixed on our submersible for what felt like an eternity, an endless moment suspended outside of time. Intelligence lived in that ancient gaze, not mere animal awareness, but something deeper, older, something that transcended human comprehension. Time seemed meaningless to a creature that had existed when dinosaurs still walked the earth, when the world was a different place, shaped by forces beyond our understanding. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, its attention shifted. The massive head, adorned with grotesque ornaments of deep-sea life, turned toward the giant squid, which continued its pulsing, vibrating call, a persistent drone in the silent abyss. The dragon-like creature's neck arched back, muscles rippling beneath scales encrusted with centuries of deep-sea growth, a display of power that sent tremors through our fragile vessel. Its mouth opened, revealing row upon row of teeth, each one bigger than a subway car, yellowed with age, but still wickedly sharp, capable of crushing our submersible like an empty soda can. The water had crept above my nose now, filling the pilot compartment with relentless, icy pressure. I twisted my head back as far as possible, pressing my face against the ceiling of the pilot compartment, desperately searching for a final pocket of air, a fleeting reprieve from the inevitable. Each breath came as a desperate gasp, a ragged struggle in the shrinking space between water and metal. My thoughts moved sluggishly through my oxygen-deprived brain, distorted and fragmented by the encroaching darkness. The Leviathan released a sound that wasn't exactly a roar, but something far more primal and terrifying. Sound traveled differently underwater, but what we experienced was a pressure wave that hit our submersible like a physical blow, a force that threatened to shatter our fragile vessel. The remaining intact glass in our viewport cracked further, spiderweb cracks spreading across its surface like frozen lightning. The vibration rattled my bones and made my teeth clack together painfully, a symphony of agony in the face of annihilation. The squid responded by changing its bioluminescent patterns, pulsing faster now. The blues and greens shifting to angry reds and oranges that lit up the abyssal darkness, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the face of the ancient dragon. Its tentacles spread wide, making it appear even larger, more formidable, as it faced the ancient dragon, a challenge thrown down in the eternal darkness. They began circling each other in a slow, deliberate dance, a ritualistic prelude to a battle that had been waged for millennia. The squid moved with surprising grace for its size, tentacles flowing through the water like living ribbons, a mesmerizing display of power and agility. The dragon's serpentine body undulated in massive curves, its tail, at least 100 m long, sweeping behind it like a living battering ram, a weapon of unimaginable force. The first attack came suddenly, without warning. The squid launched forward with astonishing speed, tentacles lashing out to wrap around the dragon's neck, a desperate attempt to constrict the ancient beast. The Leviathan twisted, trying to snap at its attacker with those enormous jaws, teeth gnashing together with the force of an earthquake. Their movements created powerful currents that caught our broken submersible and sent it sliding across the seafloor like a hockey puck, a helpless object caught in the maelstrom of their battle. I slammed against the control panel as we spun, the impact knocking my face beneath the water, a shock of icy cold that stole my breath. I thrashed upward, finding another small air pocket, gasping and choking, desperate for a moment's reprieve. My lungs burned with the agony of drowning. The cold had numbed most of my body, but panic still found ways to make itself known, a primal scream trapped in my frozen heart. Outside, the battle intensified, a clash of titans that shook the very foundations of the ocean floor. The dragon's tail whipped through the water with impossible speed, striking the squid with enough force to send the cephalopod tumbling through the darkness, a swirling mass of tentacles and bioluminescent light. The impact created a pressure wave that rocked our vessel again, sending shards of glass spiraling through the water. We bounced across the bottom, each impact sending pain shooting through my broken ribs, a chorus of agony echoing through my battered body. The squid recovered with surprising quickness, righting itself and shooting forward again, undeterred by the force of the dragon's attack. This time it aimed for the dragon's flank, its massive beak leading the charge, a weapon designed to crush the shells of deep-sea creatures now turned against an ancient god. The beak tore into ancient scales, ripping away chunks that had probably remained undisturbed for millions of years, fragments of history torn from the hide of a living legend. Bioluminescent blood poured from the wound, glowing with an unearthly blue light that clouded the water in pulsating plumes, a surreal and terrifying spectacle. The dragon roared again, this time in pain and fury, a sound that resonated through the water with the force of a sonic boom. The pressure wave was strong enough to crack what little remained of our viewport glass, sending a shower of tiny fragments into the water-filled cabin. Small shards floated inward, carried by the water now filling our cabin completely, a silent, deadly rain. I took what might be my final breath as the last air pocket disappeared, leaving me completely submerged in the icy depths. My lungs seized against the cold and pressure, refusing to function in this alien environment. Blackness crept in at the edges of my vision, a comforting darkness that promised release from the horrors I had witnessed. Yet some stubborn part of me refused to lose consciousness, refused to miss witnessing this impossible spectacle, this clash of titans that had been waged for millennia in the deepest, darkest corners of the ocean. Through the broken viewport, I watched as the titans continued their battle, a dance of death played out on a scale that defied human comprehension. The dragon lunged, jaws snapping shut on one of the squid's tentacles, severing the appendage with a sickening crunch. The tentacle thrashed wildly as the leviathan shook its head, trying to tear it free, a grotesque trophy clutched in its ancient jaws. The squid's body contorted in what must have been agony, its bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically, a silent scream in the darkness. Yet it responded with a ferocity that belied its injuries, wrapping its remaining tentacles tighter around the dragon's body, constricting its movements with surprising strength. Their struggle created an underwater earthquake, shaking the seafloor with unimaginable force. The seafloor, actual seafloor, not just the leviathan's body, shook violently beneath our vessel, sending tremors through the ancient rock formations. Ancient rock formations crumbled, sending clouds of silt and debris raining down around us, a cataclysmic event unfolding in slow motion. A boulder the size of a car crashed down mere meters from our submersible, sending us tumbling yet again, a helpless object caught in the crossfire of their battle. I floated freely inside the cabin now, no longer held by my seat restraints, which must have torn loose in the chaos, leaving me adrift in the icy water. My dead colleagues drifted alongside me, their bodies tumbling grotesquely with each impact, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The sight would have horrified me if I had any capacity for horror left, if my senses hadn't been dulled by the cold and the encroaching darkness. The squid changed tactics, abandoning its constricting grip on the dragon and retreating slightly, tentacles pulsing with angry red light, a signal of its desperate situation. The dragon pursued, its enormous body slithering across the seafloor with surprising speed, an unstoppable force of nature. As it approached, the squid suddenly expelled a massive cloud of ink, a desperate act of defense in the face of annihilation. Not ordinary squid ink, but something bioluminescent and caustic, a chemical weapon brewed in the depths of the ocean. The cloud engulfed the dragon's head, obscuring its vision and burning its ancient scales. The leviathan thrashed wildly, its roars now clearly pained as the substance burned at its eyes and scales, its rage echoing through the abyss. The water around its head bubbled and frothed as the chemical reaction continued, a testament to the potency of the squid's final defense. Taking advantage of the dragon's blindness, the squid darted forward again, its beak tearing into the dragon's neck just behind its head, a desperate strike aimed at a vital artery. More glowing blood clouded the water, obscuring the already limited visibility and creating a macabre spectacle in the abyssal darkness. Yet, the dragon was far from defeated, its ancient power undiminished by the squid's desperate attack. Blindly, it lashed out with its tail again, a weapon of unimaginable force. This time, the blow connected solidly with the squid's main body, a devastating impact that reverberated through the water. The impact was so violent that I felt it through the water despite being hundreds of meters away, a shockwave that jolted my frozen body. The squid tumbled backward, its tentacles flailing, parts of its body dimmed momentarily, the bioluminescent patterns disrupted by the force of the blow. It had been hurt badly, perhaps mortally wounded, but it refused to surrender. For a moment, the two titans separated, retreating to opposite. Through darkening vision, I watched the leviathan recover its sight, the massive glowing eyes fixing once more on its adversary, a gaze that promised only destruction. The squid's lights brightened again as it prepared for another attack, its bioluminescent patterns a defiant challenge in the face of certain defeat. Neither showed any sign of backing down despite their injuries, their ancient rivalry fueling their relentless battle. The dragon opened its mouth, preparing for another attack. But instead of another roar, something unexpected happened, something that defied all my expectations. A glow built deep in its throat, a nascent light that promised something extraordinary. A blue-white light that grew brighter by the second, illuminating the abyssal darkness with an ethereal glow. The squid seemed to recognize the threat, its tentacles suddenly spreading wide as if preparing to flee, a desperate attempt to escape the impending doom. Too late. The dragon released a focused jet of bioluminescent liquid that shot through the water like a laser, a weapon of unimaginable power. The substance struck the squid directly, enveloping its body in blue fire that seemed to burn even underwater, a surreal and terrifying spectacle. The squid's own lights flickered chaotically as it writhed in obvious agony, its bioluminescent patterns a chaotic mess of color and light. Our submersible rocked again as the dragon moved forward, closing in for what appeared to be a killing blow, its ancient rage driving it onward. Its jaws opened wide, ready to engulf the wounded squid, to end the ancient rivalry once and for all. But the cephalopod had one final defense, a last, desperate act of defiance. As the dragon approached, the squid's entire body pulsed with blinding intensity, a supernova of bioluminescent light. A light so bright it penetrated even my fading consciousness, searing its image into my retinas. The flash seemed to stun the Leviathan, halting its charge momentarily, giving the squid a precious opportunity to escape. The squid used this opportunity to retreat, shooting away into the darkness with what strength it had left, its bioluminescent trail fading as it disappeared into the abyss. Its movement kicked up massive clouds of silt that obscured everything, a swirling vortex of sediment that blotted out the light and created a temporary sanctuary. The dragon roared in frustration, its ancient rage echoing through the water with undiminished force. The pressure wave so intense it rolled our submersible over completely, sending us tumbling helplessly through the water. I tumbled weightlessly inside the flooded cabin, no longer able to tell which way was up or down, disoriented and utterly lost. My lungs screamed for air that wasn't there, burning with the agony of drowning. My brain, starved of oxygen, began shutting down non-essential functions, preparing for the final release. As darkness claimed me, the last thing I saw was the Leviathan turning, its enormous body sweeping through the water as it pursued its wounded prey into the abyssal black, its ancient rage driving it onward. The seafloor continued to tremble from their passage, ancient dust rising from ground that had remained undisturbed for eons, disturbed only by our ill-fated expedition. I felt strangely privileged despite everything, despite the terror and the loss, despite the certainty of my impending demise. No human had ever witnessed what I had seen. No scientist had ever documented these titans or their ancient battle. In the final moments of my life, I had glimpsed a world beyond human understanding, a realm of impossible creatures and primordial forces. Creatures that existed in darkness and pressure that should make life impossible, survivors of an age long lost to time. Then consciousness slipped away entirely, and I knew nothing more, the darkness complete and absolute. The darkness receded, pulled back like a heavy curtain, revealing the harsh reality of my survival. Consciousness returned in fragments, piecing itself together from the shattered remnants of my experience. First pain, then cold, then awareness, a slow and agonizing awakening. I floated in the flooded cabin, bumping gently against a control panel, my body a broken and battered wreck. My lungs burned from the water I'd inhaled, constant reminder of my near drowning. But somehow impossibly, I wasn't dead. The human body can survive without oxygen for minutes, not the eternity I seemed to have spent in darkness, adrift in the icy abyss. A faint vibration hummed through the water, distant now, a faint echo of the Titans' battle. The Titans had moved their ancient battle elsewhere, leaving our broken vessel in relative stillness, a temporary reprieve from the chaos and destruction. The emergency lights still glowed, casting a weak red haze through the water, illuminating the wreckage of our submersible and the bodies of my dead colleagues. My colleagues drifted lifelessly nearby, their forms made grotesque by the crimson illumination, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. I couldn't look at them, couldn't face what had happened to Sarah and James, couldn't bear the weight of my survival. Not now. The cold had worked its way into every part of me, chilling me to the very bone. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. They were numb and unresponsive, as if they no longer belonged to me. My hands moved like foreign objects, barely responding to my commands, clumsy and uncoordinated. But a thought cut through the haze of my fading mind, a desperate spark of hope in the face of despair. The emergency beacon, our last chance for rescue. Our main communication system was destroyed, but the submersible carried an automated distress beacon designed to activate on catastrophic system failure, a safeguard against the worst-case scenario. Clearly, it hadn't triggered automatically as intended, another failure in a long line of disasters. The manual override was located beneath a panel near the pilot station, a difficult reach in my current condition. I pushed through the water, each movement requiring immense concentration, a Herculean effort that drained my remaining strength. My arms felt weighted, my fingers clumsy as I tried to reach the access panel, my movements slow and deliberate. I bumped against it, then struggled to find purchase on its edge, my numb fingers fumbling with the cold metal. The panel cover floated away after several attempts, drifting aimlessly through the water. The beacon system looked intact, a small miracle considering the damage throughout the rest of our vessel, a testament to the durability of its design. A simple red button protected by a plastic cover awaited activation, our last hope for salvation. My numb fingers fumbled with the cover, unable to grip it properly, my movements clumsy and uncoordinated. I tried again, focusing all my remaining energy on this single task, willing my body to cooperate. The cover snapped open on my third attempt, the sound echoing faintly through the water-filled cabin. The button glowed faintly, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I pressed it with as much force as I could muster, uncertain if I'd applied enough pressure, my numb fingers unable to register the sensation. A moment later, a weak electronic chirp sounded through the water, a sign that the system was functioning, and a small light began pulsing on the device, a confirmation of its activation. The beacon was broadcasting our location and distress call on emergency frequencies, sending a signal into the vastness of the ocean. But at nearly 14,000 m deep, far beyond where any human vessel had ever ventured, the signal would need to travel through an impossible amount of water to reach the surface, battling the crushing pressure and the interference of the deep. The likelihood of anyone receiving it was virtually zero, slim chance in a sea of despair. Still, it was all I had, all that remained of hope, a desperate plea sent into the void. I drifted away from the panel, no longer having the strength to move purposefully, my body surrendering to the cold and the exhaustion. My body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, threatening to shut down my vital organs. The numbness had progressed beyond my legs, creeping upward through my torso, a sign that hypothermia was taking its toll. Only my arms and head retained any feeling, and even those sensations were dulling, fading into the encroaching darkness. The seafloor trembled, a subtle vibration that resonated through the water and into my bones. A distant roar, more felt than heard, rippled through the water, a reminder of the Titans' battle. The Titans continue their battle somewhere in the darkness, their ancient rivalry playing out on a scale beyond my comprehension. I wondered which ancient creature would emerge victorious from their confrontation, and if either would return to finish off our broken vessel, to extinguish the last spark of human life in the abyss. Time lost meaning in the cold darkness, stretching into an endless, timeless void. I might have been floating for minutes or hours, or perhaps even days, my perception distorted by the lack of oxygen and the extreme cold. My thoughts grew increasingly disordered, jumping between memories of the surface world and the impossible creatures I'd witnessed, a chaotic jumble of images and emotions. I thought about sunny days on research vessels, about Sarah's excitement when discovering new species, about James's quiet competence with machinery, memories that now seem like a distant dream. Another tremor shook our submersible, stronger than before, a jolt that sent a wave of pain through my battered body. The battle was moving closer again, threatening to engulf us in its chaos and destruction. Or perhaps it was something else, something even more terrifying. The seafloor itself responding to the conflict of giants, the very fabric of the ocean reacting to their primordial struggle. My eyelids grew heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and the encroaching darkness. It would be easy to let go now, to surrender to the inevitable, to join my colleagues in the peace of oblivion, a release from the suffering and the terror. The beacon was activated, sending its desperate signal into the void. I'd done all I could, exhausted all my resources. No one would blame me for surrendering to the inevitable, for succumbing to the forces that had overwhelmed us. The sound penetrated my fading consciousness, a new and unexpected noise that jolted me back from the brink of oblivion. Not the organic vibration of the Leviathan, but something mechanical and rhythmic, regular and deliberate, a sound that promised hope. Sonar pings, unmistakable and clear, echoing through the water. My eyes opened wider, struggling to focus in the dim light. The sound came again, clearer now, closer now, an unmistakable sign of rescue. Active sonar sweeping the area, searching for survivors. But that was impossible, an impossibility that defied all logic and reason. Nothing could function at this depth. No vessel could withstand the crushing pressure. No vessel could reach us here. Light pierced the darkness outside our viewport, a beacon of hope in the abyssal night. Not the diffuse glow of bioluminescence, but focused beams sweeping methodically across the seafloor, searching with relentless precision. The lights paused when they reached our submersible, illuminating the wreckage with harsh clarity, revealing the full extent of the damage. I blinked, certain I was hallucinating, my mind playing cruel tricks in its final moments. Oxygen deprivation and hypothermia could cause vivid visions before death, creating illusions that seemed impossibly real. This had to be my brain's final comfort, the illusion of rescue, a fleeting moment of hope before the final plunge into darkness. The light grew brighter, more intense, cutting through the water with unwavering purpose. A shape materialized from the darkness beyond, resolving itself into the form of another submersible, a vessel of rescue. It was sleek and black, its design streamlined and efficient, a stark contrast to our broken and battered research vessel. With none of the bulky proportions of our research vessel, its design was unlike anything I'd ever seen, more advanced than any deep-sea technology one knew existed, a marvel of engineering. The vessel maneuvered closer, its exterior lights examining our broken hull, assessing the damage with methodical precision. It circled slowly, deliberately, as if analyzing the situation, searching for a way to effect a rescue. I could make out the NOAA insignia on its side, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a symbol of hope in the face of despair. But how? NOAA didn't possess technology capable of reaching these depths. It was a logistical impossibility. The rescue submersible positioned itself above us, hovering in the water with effortless grace. Mechanical arms extended from its underbelly with slow, precise movements, their movements deliberate and controlled. The manipulators were far more advanced than our lost sample collection arm, equipped with multiple joints allowing for complex movements, a testament to the advanced technology of this vessel. The arms reached for specific points on our hull, attaching what looked like lifting cables, securing our vessel for the ascent. I watched in disbelief as the cables tightened, taking the strain of our broken vessel. Our submersible shuddered, groaning under the pressure, then began to move, slowly and deliberately. We were being lifted, raised from the depths by a force beyond our comprehension. The ascent began gradually, a slow and steady climb toward the surface. The rescue vessel pulled us from the seafloor, raising us meter by meter toward the surface, defying the crushing pressure of the deep. The enormous pressure that had crushed our hull began to ease incrementally, welcome relief from the constant strain. My ears popped painfully as the pressure changed, a reminder of the immense forces we were battling. I floated to the cracked viewport, pressing my face against it to look downward, wanting to see what we were leaving behind. Far below, Illuminated briefly by the rescue vessel's powerful lights, I caught glimpses of movement, fleeting shadows in the abyssal darkness. The Titans were still there, massive shapes engaged in their ancient battle, their conflict continuing unabated. The dragon's bioluminescent blood glowed in blue clouds throughout the water, a surreal and haunting spectacle. The squid's tentacles flashed with angry pulses of light, a defiant display of power in the face of defeat. They continued their conflict, oblivious to our departure from their domain, lost in their ancient rivalry. The sight confirmed I wasn't hallucinating, dispelling the lingering doubts in my mind. The creatures were real. The battle was real. Everything we'd witnessed was real. As we rose higher, the pressure continued to decrease, easing the strain on my battered body. Water seeped out through the same cracks it had entered, the flow reversing as external pressure lessened, a sign that we were ascending. My head cleared slightly, though the cold remained bone-deep and absolute, a constant reminder of the ordeal I had endured. I drifted in and out of consciousness during our ascent, my senses dulled by exhaustion and the lingering effects of hypothermia. Each time I opened my eyes, we had risen further from the abyss, ascending toward the light. The darkness below grew more distant, fading into the inky blackness of the deep ocean. The Titans became invisible, lost in the depths from which they'd emerged, their battle a mystery to the world above. Hours seemed to pass, stretching into an endless, timeless void. My periods of consciousness grew shorter, mere glimpses of our journey upward, fleeting moments of awareness in a sea of darkness. The crushing weight of the deep ocean gradually released us, easing the strain on our battered vessel and my broken body. Pain returned to parts of my body that had been numb, welcome, albeit agonizing, sensation. A bad sign, medically speaking, but undeniable proof I was still alive, still clinging to life against all odds. During one moment of clarity, I realized with sudden, simple certainty that I might actually survive this impossible ordeal, that against all odds, I would emerge from the abyss. The thought seemed absurd after everything that had happened, after the terror and the loss. James and Sarah were gone, lost to the depths forever. I'd witnessed creatures that shouldn't exist, titans that defied all human understanding. I'd been to depths no human had ever reached, and lived to tell about it, a survivor of an impossible journey. Yet here I was, ascending toward the world above, clinging to life against all odds. In my final moment of consciousness, light filtered through the water around us, a welcome sign that we were nearing the surface. Not artificial illumination, but the diffuse blue glow of sunlight penetrating the upper ocean layers, a promise of warmth and life. The light grew stronger, brighter as we continued to rise, banishing the darkness of the deep. After endless darkness, the simple beauty of natural light brought tears to my eyes, mixing with the seawater around my face, a testament to the enduring power of hope. The surface, with all its warmth and air and life, waited above us, a beacon of salvation in the vast ocean. I reached toward it weakly, my arm floating upward through the water, a gesture of hope and gratitude. Then darkness claimed me once more, a final surrender to the exhaustion and the pain. White light pierced my eyelids, a searing brightness that jolted me back to consciousness. After endless darkness in the deep ocean, the brightness felt like needles stabbing directly into my brain, a painful awakening. I turned away, groaning as awareness gradually returned, piecing itself together from the shattered remnants of my experience. Crisp sheets rustled beneath me, a soft and comforting sensation against my battered body. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, a sterile and clinical scent. That unmistakable scent of illness and efficiency that exists only in hospitals, a reminder of my precarious state. My throat burned raw, likely from the breathing tube they'd removed, a testament to the trauma my body had endured. When I tried to swallow, pain flared through my esophagus, a sharp and agonizing sensation. My lips cracked when I attempted to wet them, a sign of severe dehydration. "You're awake?" A woman's voice came from somewhere to my right, a gentle and reassuring sound. "Try not to move too much," she cautioned. "I'll get the doctor," she added, before her footsteps retreated across what sounded like linoleum flooring, the sound echoing through the sterile room. I forced my eyes open again, squinting against the overhead fluorescence, the harsh light a painful contrast to the darkness I had experienced. White ceiling tiles came into focus, then the metal rail of a hospital bed, familiar objects in this alien environment. And 4 stands stood beside me, clear liquid dripping steadily into a tube connected to my arm, nourishing my body and replenishing my depleted fluids. I lifted my hand, noting the pulse oximeter clipped to my finger and the hospital band around my wrist, markers of my identity and my current condition. My skin looked pale and waxy, a sign of prolonged exposure to the cold and the trauma my body had endured. How long had I been here, adrift in this sterile environment? I tried to sit up but stopped when pain radiated through my entire body, a chorus of agony echoing through my battered frame. Everything hurt, every muscle and every bone. My chest ached with each breath, suggesting broken ribs, a painful reminder of the forces I had endured. My fingers felt stiff and swollen, unresponsive to my commands. But most concerning was the strange lightness I sensed below my torso, a disconcerting sensation that filled me with dread. I reached for the sheet covering my legs, wanting to confront the reality of my situation. Before I could pull it back, a doctor entered with brisk efficiency, his movements precise and controlled, followed by 2 nurses, their faces masked with professional concern. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Good to see you conscious," he added, his words measured and deliberate. He picked up a chart from the foot of my bed, glancing at it with a practiced eye. "I'm Dr. Levine," he said, introducing himself. "You're at Scripps Memorial Hospital in San Diego," he continued, providing me with information to orient myself. "Today is Thursday, March 10th, he added, stating the date. "You've been unconscious for 3 days since your rescue," he concluded, revealing the extent of my ordeal. San Diego, 3 days, the information felt disconnected from reality, as if I were hearing about someone else's experience. "Water," I managed to rasp, my voice weak and strained, my throat raw and burning. One of the nurses brought a cup with a straw, offering me a welcome reprieve from my discomfort. The cool liquid soothed my raw throat momentarily, easing the burning sensation. "What happened to me?" I asked, my voice still rough and barely audible. "How did I get here?" I pressed, needing to understand the events that had led to my current situation. Dr. Levine's expression turned carefully neutral, his professional demeanor masking his inner thoughts. "You were rescued from a submersible accident in the Pacific," he said, stating the facts with measured precision. "You were airlifted here immediately after surfacing due to the severity of your condition," he continued, explaining the circumstances of my rescue. "You were suffering from extreme hypothermia, decompression sickness, and extensive tissue damage," he concluded, summarizing the extent of my injuries. I nodded slightly, processing this sanitized version of events, understanding the medical jargon but struggling to grasp the full reality of my experience. "My legs," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Something's wrong with my legs," I stated, voicing my greatest fear. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurses, a silent communication passing between them. "Mr. Miller," I need to inform you that we had to perform emergency surgery when you arrived, he said, his voice grave. The prolonged exposure to near-freezing temperatures caused severe frostbite in your lower extremities, he continued, explaining the reason for the surgery. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't save tissue below the knees, he concluded, delivering the devastating news. We had to amputate both legs to prevent further complications, he added, stating the harsh reality of my situation. I let his words sink in, strangely detached from their meaning, as if he were talking about someone else. After facing certain death in the crushing darkness of the abyss, the loss of my legs seemed almost inconsequential, a minor sacrifice in the face of survival. I was alive, which still felt impossible, a miracle beyond comprehension. Sarah and James, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My colleagues, where are they? I asked, needing to know their fate. Another exchanged glance between a medical staff, a silent acknowledgement of the tragic truth. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, Dr. Levine said quietly. You were the only survivor pulled from the wreckage. Even though I'd seen the deaths of your crewmates with my own eyes, actually hearing it confirmed made it hit me in a whole new way. The sheer, crushing weight of the loss bore down on me. I was the one who piloted them into that godforsaken trench, into unbelievably dangerous territory. I asked about their families, if they'd been notified. Dr. Levine said that they had. The authorities handled all those arrangements. I closed my eyes, just trying to imagine those conversations. What in God's name had their families been told? What explanation could even begin to make sense of what had happened down there? I asked about the research vessel. Kustav's dream was involved in my rescue. Beyond that, he didn't have any specific details about the mission itself. The tone in his voice made it pretty clear that was the end of what he was willing or even able to discuss. Dr. Levine spent the next 20 minutes examining me and painstakingly explaining my medical condition. The frostbite damage was catastrophic. My legs had basically frozen solid in the near-zero temperatures of the deep ocean. Even with emergency treatment, there was no way to save them. I'd also suffered several broken ribs, a mild concussion, and pretty significant damage to my lungs from all the water I'd inhaled. He went on to explain the treatment I'd received for decompression sickness, including hyperbaric oxygen therapy to deal with the nitrogen bubbles that had formed in my blood and tissues during the rapid ascent from those extreme depths. You're incredibly lucky to be alive, he concluded. With the combination of injuries you sustained, your survival is nothing short of a miracle. Miracle wasn't exactly the word I would have used. The image of that massive rescue, submersible, flashed through my mind. Technology one didn't even know existed, with capabilities far beyond what should have been humanly possible. After the doctor finally left, I just sank back into the pillows, my mind racing with questions. How in the world had they found us at that depth, which was supposedly impossible to reach? Who had built a rescue vessel capable of operating nearly 14,000 meters underwater? And most importantly, who was ever going to believe what I'd actually seen down there? I must have drifted back off to sleep because when I opened my eyes again, the light streaming through the window had totally changed. Late afternoon sun was casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. And I definitely wasn't alone. A man was sitting in the chair next to my bed, watching me with this detached, almost clinical interest. He was wearing a navy blue suit, perfectly pressed, with a discreet pin on his lapel bearing the NOAA insignia. His silver-gray hair was immaculately cut and combed. He had the kind of look of someone who had never been caught unprepared in his entire life. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller," he said, the moment he noticed I was awake. "My name is Robert Thompson. I represent NOAA's Deep Sea Research Division. He didn't offer his hand or even stand up. I'm glad to see you're recovering. His words carried absolutely no genuine warmth. This was a man simply performing a necessary function, nothing more. You're here about what happened, I said. Yes. He carefully placed a slim briefcase on his lap and opened it. I need to discuss the official report regarding the incident with the Deep Explorer. Official report? I repeated flatly. Yes. Thompson took out a folder and placed it on the edge of my bed, right where I could reach it. The investigation has concluded that the Deep Explorer experienced a catastrophic mechanical failure during routine research operations in the Monterey Canyon. This failure unfortunately resulted in the deaths of Sarah Anderson and James Rodriguez, as well as your severe injuries. I just stared at him, completely dumbfounded. That's not what happened. Thompson's expression remained perfectly neutral, like a mask. Mr. Miller, you experienced severe psychological trauma during this incident. The medical team has documented significant oxygen deprivation to your brain, along with nitrogen narcosis and extreme hypothermia. These conditions are known to cause vivid hallucinations, particularly in high-stress situations. I know what I saw, I insisted, my voice gaining strength despite my raw throat. What you believe you saw? Thompson corrected mildly. He opened the folder and turned a typewritten document toward me. This statement describes the equipment malfunction and the emergency ascent procedures that were implemented. Your signature will simply confirm this version of events for the official record. I didn't even reach for the paper. We went deeper than the Challenger deep. We saw something down there. Something impossible. Thompson maintained that neutral expression, but his eyes definitely hardened ever so slightly. Mr. Miller, there is absolutely no submarine technology currently capable of surviving below 11,000 meters. As I'm sure you're well aware, the Monterey Canyon's maximum depth is just over 4,000 meters. Then how did I get frostbite? I challenged him. The water temperature at 4,000 meters doesn't drop low enough to freeze human tissue. Your vessel lost heating capability during the hull breach, he replied smoothly, without missing a beat. Combined with the extended time in the cold water before your rescue, this resulted in your injuries. He had an answer for absolutely everything. A perfectly sanitized, logical explanation that would satisfy anyone who hadn't actually been there. The things we saw, I began, were hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation and extreme stress, Thompson finished for me. This is very well documented in cases of near-drowning and decompression events. He removed another document from the folder. This is a confidentiality agreement. It legally binds you to never discuss alternative versions of events beyond what is contained in the official report. I let out a bitter laugh that pulled painfully at my ribs. And if I refuse? Thompson's expression didn't change one iota, but his voice took on a subtly, yet distinctly harder edge. Mr. Miller, your medical care, including the extensive rehabilitation and prosthetics you'll require, amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your pension and benefits are contingent upon your cooperation with the official investigation findings. He paused for a moment, letting the full implications sink in. Additionally, contradicting the official report would constitute a breach of your employment contract with NOAA, potentially opening you up to litigation. This would be unfortunate, especially given your current condition and future employment prospects. The threat was crystal clear, even if it was politely delivered. I glanced down at where my legs should have been beneath the thin hospital blanket. I had no job, no legs, and apparently no right to the truth. 2 people died, I said quietly. Don't their families deserve to know what really happened? Their families deserve closure, Thompson countered, his voice unwavering. Not fantastic stories that would only add to their pain and confusion. He slid a pin onto the blanket next to the documents. The sooner we resolve this matter, the sooner everyone can begin healing and moving forward. I looked at the papers, then back up at Thompson's impassive face. There was absolutely no empathy there, no flicker of curiosity about what we might have discovered down there. Only cold, bureaucratic efficiency. The submersible that rescued me, I said. It wasn't like anything I've ever seen before. It operated at depths that shouldn't even be possible. Thompson's expression flickered for just a brief moment, the first genuine reaction I'd seen from him. The rescue vessel was a standard NOAA deep-sea recovery vehicle. Your perception of it was likely affected by your condition at the time. He was lying. I knew it with absolute certainty. The vessel that had pulled us from that abyss was far, far beyond any standard technology. It had functioned effortlessly at depths where the laws of physics should have crushed it instantly. But I was in absolutely no position to prove any of it. My colleagues were dead. The only evidence lay at the bottom of an unmapped trench nearly 14,000 meters below the ocean surface. All I had were my own memories, which Thompson had already dismissed as mere hallucinations. Sarah kept logs, I said, grasping for anything at all, that might corroborate my story. She was documenting everything on her tablet. All equipment was lost in the accident, Thompson replied, his voice flat. Nothing was recovered except your damaged vessel and yourself. My heart just sank. Of course, they would have removed any and all evidence. If such a vessel actually existed to rescue me, they clearly had the capability to sanitize the entire scene before anyone else could even investigate. Thompson checked his watch, a subtle gesture of impatience. Mr. Miller, I understand that this is difficult for you. You've suffered tremendous trauma, both physical and psychological. But signing these documents is truly in everyone's best interest, including your own. I just stare at the ceiling, feeling the walls closing in around me. I had no allies here. No one who would believe what I'd seen in those impossible depths. I was completely alone, seriously injured, and entirely at the mercy of whatever agency Thompson actually represented. With a resigned sigh, I reached for the pen. My hand was trembling as I scrawled my signature across the documents, one after another. Each stroke felt like a betrayal of Sarah, of James, of the truth itself. Thompson collected the papers, carefully inspecting each signature before returning them to his briefcase with methodical precision. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Miller. NOAA will, of course, continue to cover your medical expenses and rehabilitation. A representative will be in touch regarding your disability benefits. He stood up and straightened his already immaculate suit. I want to assure you that your contribution to marine research is still valued. Once you've recovered, we can discuss limited consulting opportunities that would allow you to continue in the field, albeit in a different capacity. I didn't respond. There was really nothing left to say. Thompson simply nodded once, then turned and walked out of my room, taking the truth with him. The door closed with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. I was left alone with my thoughts, my pain, and the vivid memory of those enormous eyes watching me from the darkness of an ocean deeper than science even acknowledged existed. Eyes that I knew would never leave me, no matter what documents I signed. The massive I was pressed right up against the viewport, studying me with an ancient intelligence. Water filled the cabin, rising to my chin. Sarah and James were floating lifelessly nearby, their bodies grotesquely distorted in the red emergency light. I tried desperately to scream, but I couldn't make a sound as the freezing water rose past my lips, filling my lungs while I just continued watching. I woke up gasping for air, my sheets completely soaked with sweat. My heart was racing like a hummingbird as I grabbed the edge of my bed, trying to get my bearings. My small apartment in Santa Barbara, not the crushing depths of the Pacific. Morning light was filtering through the half-drawn blinds. The clock read 6:15, the exact same time I'd woken up for the past 6 months, night after night. The nightmare never varied, and it never got any easier. I sat up and rubbed my face, feeling the rough stubble I hadn't even bothered to shave in days. My legs, or what was left of them, were aching with phantom pain, a cruel and constant reminder of what the depths had so brutally taken from me. My wheelchair was waiting right beside the bed. I'd become pretty proficient at the transfer, planting my hands firmly on a mattress, swinging my body into position, and carefully adjusting myself in the seat. The high-tech prosthetics that Dr. Levine had promised me were standing in the corner of the bedroom. Custom-made, top-of-the-line, and easily worth more than a year's salary. Thompson had at least kept that particular promise. I wheeled myself into the kitchen, where bills and research papers covered practically every single surface. The apartment was small, just a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a living area that also doubled as my office. The rent was reasonable, and the building actually had an elevator and other accessibility features, which made it the perfect place for a man trying to rebuild his entire life from scratch. My coffee maker gurgled to life thanks to its timer. I grabbed a mug from the dish rack and waited, staring out the window at the tiny sliver of ocean that was visible between the neighboring buildings. The sight no longer brought me any comfort. The peaceful blue surface now held far too many secrets. After pouring myself a cup of coffee, I wheeled over to the table where that damn folder was sitting. I placed it there last night after pulling it out of the desk drawer, where it had been living ever since my release from the hospital. The manila edges were softened from handling, even though I rarely actually opened it anymore. Inside was the copy of the confidentiality agreement I'd signed, along with Noah's official accident report. I opened it now, scanning the sterile, emotionless language. Catastrophic equipment failure. Hull integrity compromised. Pressure seal malfunction. Unfortunate loss of life. Nothing at all about 14,000 meters. Nothing about giant squid or ancient sea dragons. And certainly nothing about the rescue vessel that shouldn't have existed in the first place. I closed the folder and sipped my coffee. It had been 6 long months since I'd woken up in that sterile hospital room. 5 months since I'd been released with these brand new legs that I couldn't even use yet. For months since I'd begun physical therapy, learning how to stand and walk again on titanium and carbon fiber, all while Noah quietly and efficiently removed my access to their research databases. 3 months since my first desperate attempt to speak with Dr. Miyazaki at Scripps Institution of Oceanography about what I'd seen down there. He'd listened politely, offer me a cup of tea, and then gently suggested trauma counseling. I got the exact same response from everyone else I approached. Former colleagues, research partners, even journalists who specialize in marine science. They'd all been sympathetic, but ultimately dismissive. The ones who knew me better tried their best to hide the concern in their eyes. Dave, they'd say, what you're describing is physically impossible. The pressure at those depths would crush any life form, let alone something that size. You're still just processing the trauma. Eventually, I just stopped trying to talk about it. The dreams, however, continued, night after night. I finished my coffee and wheeled myself into the bathroom. The mirror showed a totally different man than the one who had descended into the Monterey Canyon just 6 months ago. My face had thinned out, with deeper lines etched around my eyes. My salt and pepper hair now definitely had more salt than pepper. I'd lost a significant amount of muscle mass, despite the grueling physical therapy. After showering and getting dressed, I faced my daily choice: wheelchair or prosthetics. The physical therapist had strongly encouraged me to use the prosthetics for gradually increasing periods each day. The only way you're going to get comfortable with them is through practice, she told me. I chose the chair today. My stumps were still sore from yesterday's session, and I didn't have any appointments that required me to actually walk. Hell, nobody even expected me anywhere. The entire research community had collectively, and oh so politely, turned its back on me. Back at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop. The screen showed an article about oceanic trenches that I'd been reading last night, just one of hundreds that I'd consumed since returning home. I'd become completely obsessed with deep-sea research, searching for any mention of anomalous findings, unexpected readings, or unexplained phenomena in the world's oceans. But nothing even came close to what we'd experienced down there. If others had encountered the Titans, they certainly weren't talking about it. I closed the article and opened my personal email. It was completely empty, except for physical therapy reminders and various bills. My professional email had gone completely silent months ago. Former colleagues had stopped checking in. Invitations to conferences and peer review requests had completely ceased. It was as if 20 years of solid research experience had been erased right along with my legs. The disability payments, however, came regularly, deposited directly into my account. Enough to live on, especially with the medical expenses covered. A golden cage meticulously built by whatever agency Thompson actually represented. I wheeled over to the window and looked out at the ocean again. Somewhere out there, beneath that deceptively peaceful surface, those creatures continue their ancient battle in the darkness. Did the giant squid actually survive? Did the dragon return to its million-year slumber? No one would ever know the truth. The thought of Sarah and James hit me suddenly, as it so often did. Their families had received the official story, along with generous compensation packages that came with their own airtight confidentiality clauses. I tried desperately to attend their funerals, but I'd still been hospitalized at the time. By the time I was finally released, their cases were closed, and their memories had been thoroughly sanitized. They deserved so much better than that. They deserved the truth, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. I wheeled back over to the table and just stared at the confidentiality agreement. The language was crystal clear and undeniably threatening. Disclosure of any information contradicting the official report will result in immediate termination of benefits, legal action for breach of contract, and potential prosecution under national security statutes. They'd taken my career. They'd taken my reputation. They'd even taken a significant part of my body. But they couldn't take my memories or my voice, not unless I let them. I flipped the agreement over and pulled my laptop closer. Opening a new document, I stared at the blank page for several long minutes. What I was about to do would be a direct violation of my contract. It would very likely end what little financial security I had left, and it might even expose me to legal consequences that I simply couldn't afford to fight. But Sarah and James deserved to have their real story told, and the world deserved to know what was really lurking in our planet's deepest, darkest places. I placed my fingers on the keyboard and began to type. The water reached my chin as I drifted further toward accepting my fate when the first vibration pulsed through the hull and my chest. The words came easily now, pouring out of me after months and months of brutal suppression. I described absolutely everything: the submersible, the descent, the impossible trench, the creatures, and the harrowing rescue. I wrote about Sarah's unbridled excitement at each new discovery and James' quiet, yet unwavering competence. I detailed the giant squid's sudden attack, the crushing depths, and the ancient leviathan that had slumbered undisturbed for millennia until our intrusion. I wrote about the rescue vessel that shouldn't have even existed and the cold, calculating government agent who had forced me to deny everything I'd seen with my own eyes. I wrote about waking up with no legs and a new, unwanted identity as the man who had simply survived a tragic accident, rather than the man who had actually discovered something world-changing. The sun crossed the sky as I typed. I didn't even stop for lunch. My coffee grew cold and stale beside me. My fingers were aching from the constant, relentless movement, but I simply couldn't stop now. The words just kept coming, filling page after page with the raw truth that I'd been forbidden to speak. As the evening shadows lengthened across my apartment, I finally reached the end of my story. I described my current situation, the recurring nightmares, the crippling isolation, and the devastating loss of purpose. I explained why I was breaking my silence despite the potentially catastrophic consequences. I read through everything I'd written, making only small corrections, but deliberately leaving the raw emotion completely intact. It wasn't scientific or detached in any way. It was deeply personal and undeniably true. With the document finally complete, I faced the next big decision: what to actually do with it. Publishing it online would definitely reach the widest possible audience, but would also be easily traced back to me. Sending it to journalists might provide at least some protection, but most mainstream outlets would likely dismiss it out of hand without any solid corroboration. And all academic channels were now completely closed to me. For now, I just saved the document to an encrypted drive. The mere act of writing it had been enough for today, a small act of rebellion against the suffocating silence that had been so brutally imposed upon me. For the first time in 6 months, I actually felt something other than grief and anger. A heavy weight had finally lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose that I'd completely lost since that fateful day in the deep. I closed my laptop and wheeled over to the window. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the water in breathtaking shades of orange and gold. Somewhere beneath that beautiful surface lay the answers to questions that humanity had barely even begun to ask. Tomorrow, I would finally decide how to share what I'd written with the world. Tomorrow, I would bravely face the consequences of breaking my silence. But tonight, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of genuine peace ever since watching that massive eye studying me through the cracked viewport. The truth was finally free now, even if I wasn't. And that was more than enough for tonight.